What is up, everybody? You do the intro. I gotta mess with the signal levels.
Oh, I gotta do the intro? Okay. Well, shalom. Welcome, everyone, to another Alternate Media Live special. Still continuing in the Killing the Church series, but because we no longer live on the same street, we have to do this live now. So, however, for the holidays, which we'll be discussing here in a little bit, there will be some times where we can get together and do like an old-fashioned style KTC episode. So be on the lookout for that coming up here soon, because we have a few different holidays coming up, and a couple of them we will actually be together and able to worship together, and so it's going to be an awesome time. Super stoked for it. But for now, tonight's episode is going to be predominantly about what really makes you different from the world as a believer, and we'll kind of segue into that. Well, first we'll discuss some of the holidays, if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, I think we got all our levels up and running. We got people in the chat good to go. Everything's looking good. No technical issues yet until somebody says something. So we wanted to take the time since Tuesday, so Monday night, Tuesday day, according to the regular Gregorian calendar, will be what is traditionally observed as the Jewish New Year, or otherwise known as Rosh Hashanah, which is more or less just Hebrew for the head of the month, or the head of the year, excuse me. But biblically, it would be the Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets. And that's coming up. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that. And but the reason we wanted to talk about being different from the world and that kind of topic is because this is really what separates. We take the definition of holy, which we know to really just mean to be separate. And we live in the world, but we are not of the world. And that's something that you and I like to say a lot. And the holidays is a really good time to be incredibly visually and physically different from basically the rest of the world. Let's be honest.
Yes.
Yeah. The America as a whole does not celebrate Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. That's pretty widely known as like a specifically Jewish holiday. I take issue with calling it a Jewish holiday. Call it a biblical holiday instead.
Right. And so it's funny actually, at Torah study just yesterday, Dad was explaining how he used to oppose the name Rosh Hashanah, right? Because for a various number of reasons, but not so much anymore, because there's now an understanding of why it's considered the new year. Different from the new year that we understand Pesach is based on, right? Because at the beginning of the passage about Passover, Hashem begins by telling the children of Israel, this will be the first of months for you, or the beginning of months for you. So it's like, okay, so that's when the year starts then. So then what's this? How does Rosh Hashanah, which comes at, the head of the harvest season, how is that the new year? And there's a difference. There's a difference between the annual yearly cycle and the creation cycle.
Yeah. I remember when I was talking about this with your dad too. It was a while ago when we were talking about it. But so we know that Judaism actually largely, at least in ancient times, didn't celebrate birthdays. Now, why is that relevant? Because more or less, we traditionally it's been accepted that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the day of creation. Either whether it's the first day of creation or the day that Adam was created, it's kind of like a Talmudic discussion that's constantly happening. But it's recognized as the anniversary of creation, of the creation narrative. So it's kind of like the birthday of the universe. But at Passover, that was the birthday of Israel. Israel had existed before that, so it's more like their rebirth day. And so the rebirth day, when you come out of her, my people, kind of thing, when you are drawn away from your personal exodus, your rebirth day is what counts more than your physical birthday. Still important, you were physically born, but your spiritual rebirth is far more important. And so that's why there's two Jewish New Years. Some people don't realize that there are two different Jewish New Years, but only one of the New Years changes the calendar year day, and the other one is recognized as being the new year according to the Exodus account.
Right, and on the note of Rosh Hashanah being acknowledged as kind of the anniversary of the creation, this is something that I actually learned this year. Actually, is the whole month leading up to this day is understood for the entire month that the energy that was present at the creation is active in the universe for this whole month. And so it's understood actually that you can take this month and you can recreate a new version of yourself. And that's part of what Rosh Hashanah is a culminating resemblance of. So it's a really beautiful picture actually.
Yeah.
Of self reflection, which is something else we're going to be coming up here very soon. It's funny how after Rosh Hashanah you have the holiday of Yom Kippur, which is all self reflection.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And the days leading up to Yom Kippur are known as the days of awe, right? So you take 10 days. Yom Kippur is 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. And that's their time where you start to take time to reflect on anything that you may have wronged another person, or things that you need to set right, and prepare for your meeting day with the King, right? So it's kind of like these are your days in which you prepare yourself for your meeting with the King, and that's how the Jewish people have seen it throughout history is kind of that. And so that teaching that we're familiar with Jesus when he says, like lay down your sacrifice. If you remember, you have an issue between you and your brother, put it down right there, go back, fix it, and then come back and pick up where you left off. Like the days of awe, that's where that teaching is actually incredibly stressed. That's not a new Jewish teaching, by the way, when Yeshua taught that. That's a common Jewish teaching, and that is stressed during the 10-day period, where you make sure before you go stand before the Almighty that every and anything that you can possibly think of, that you did your best to reach out and try to set that right before you stand before the Almighty. And so it's that, like you're saying, a time of reflection, self-reflection, and I love this holiday season. This is my favorite set of holidays, right, coming up, man.
Yes.
And not just because we're literally commanded to drink alcohol on Sukkot. That's a bonus.
Yeah, not just to drink alcohol. Like the idea is actually we will be using tithe money to purchase it.
Yeah, I love that we're supposed to be setting away money specifically for this holiday, where you go out and buy a ton of food and drink and share it with close friends, people who've maybe never celebrated the holiday before. Like, this is your, spending blowout, and make sure you make it a massive thing for you, for everybody around you, and for hopefully even a stranger, somebody who's never done it before. Invite them in your house and expose them to the greatness. And that's a strong opportunity for witnessing, testimony. And it's, once again, this is not new. This is a typical Jewish teaching. This is the way they typically view this holiday.
Well, while we're at that, actually, we did not do our drink introduction. What are you drinking today?
We did not. I can't believe we forgot. So I did not realize that Oktoberfest was out already until last week when we were on Captain Dadpool's show. And so I made sure to, come on, camera, work with me, work with me. Yeah, whatever. You see it. It's orange. So I'm having an Oktoberfest, and I put a plate carrier on all my beers, because if you're not willing to protect your beer, then don't worry about even putting a plate carrier on yourself. Why bother?
Right.
Priorities.
I am actually going to be doing the Guinness. Hang on. The nitro cold brew.
Yes.
Yes. I love it, and I love that it does the same thing actually that the regular Guinness does.
That is, I have one in the fridge right now, but it is the most delicious Guinness. It tastes exactly like cold brew coffee. It's so good.
I know. I love it.
That's like
and
my
I love
new
that
favorite
it does
Guinness
that thing.
is the nitro cold brew. Gosh, it's beautiful.
It looks so pretty when it's the bubbles
As an
turning into the
Irishman,
beer.
I would love to take credit and say that the Irishman definitely did a great job on Guinness, but clearly, as you can see, that this is a creation of God.
The coffee bean, right?
The Irish are only taking partial credit. Guinness is a miracle.
Right.
So,
So that's what I'll be doing. And on this, so we just mentioned, that there's a particular holiday coming up, Sukkot, where we will be purchasing and drinking alcohol, and purchasing alcohol with money that most Christians might be putting in an offering plate. And that may seem quite taboo.
Yeah, we may have to do a separate episode on the idea of the tithe, actually. But that's not tonight's theme, so we kind of have to brush over it.
Yeah.
But what the heck? Let's talk about it a little bit. We have time. We're only 7 minutes in.
Right.
At least I think we're only 7 minutes in. Yeah, I don't know. I can't tell.
Something like that.
Whatever. Yeah. The tithe, what most Christians think of as a tithe, as like using that word, is actually just charity, or it's tzedakah. It's completely different.
Yep.
And you actually might be a little bit more well acquainted with the process of the temple tithe and the two different tithes. Yes, there are two different tithes. In case some of you guys didn't know, man, we're just dropping all sorts of bombs today. But yeah, if you want to give a kind of a brief synopsis overview of what the tithe actually is, and then kind of bring that back around to why we're even talking about it to begin with, because of Sukkot.
Right. There's the temple tax. That is what is due to the temple, for the maintaining and the upkeep of the temple, and that is 1/10. But additionally, there is the 1/10 that is expected as an offering, of sorts. You may be able to explain that a little better than me. But I'm more familiar on the kind of the ruling of, well, this would be why, you are, unless otherwise instructed, like 1/5, 2/10 is essentially what you're supposed to be giving, and not exceeding that point, because it could put you in a position of financial burdenship.
That's 2/5
And
actually is the
so
ruling.
is it 2/5?
And there's another. There's actually a different rabbi that
Okay.
says no more than 2/3, like a little over half. But I believe the current
Interesting.
accepted ruling was 2/5, no more than 2/5. So a little less than half. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so the other, that's not the temple tax, this is something to be given, and given to God in a more general sense, in that this is something that is, like we discussed earlier, it's tzedakah. It's to be given, well, to to the least of these. It's funny, that was what we read in Matthew yesterday at the Torah study. Is the passage in chapter 25 about doing unto the least of these. So this is something that doesn't have to go in the offering plate, which the tithe, the temple tax, that shouldn't go in a church offering plate anyway, because that's directly tied to the temple. But the other 10%, that can go to anything, and so you could put it in an offering plate if you want, but that's not biblically mandated. You can actually also give it to any charity that you so choose, or you can give it to any individuals that you think have a need, and that you think could use it in any kind of way or capacity. And so I think a lot of the pressure that a lot of Christians today feel, actually, regarding charity, is because they're thinking, oh man, I'm already putting a tenth into the church, if not more. Some people do put more than a tenth into the church, and so then another charity on top of that seems a little bit burdensome. Which, even so, if you're gonna give on top of that, that's definitely good. But I don't think they should feel obligated to give to their church, because that's not the purpose of this 10%. And you're actually completing the mitzvah much more so to use it for charitable reasons. But in addition to that, for the holiday, Sukkot specifically, this is able to be used for purchasing whatever you need to celebrate the holiday, up to and including liquor and alcoholic beverages.
Yeah. What's the? I know it's Deuteronomy. Is it 12?
Yeah, hang on. I just had it pulled up here
Yeah. We'll go ahead and
a minute
read
ago.
it.
It is Deuteronomy 14:26,
14.
actually.
There we go.
Yep.
I got it in the
14:26.
Tree of Life version. It reads. I'll read the verse before and the verse after for some context. Then you are to exchange the tithe for silver. Bind up the silver in your hand and go to the place that Adonai your God chooses. You may spend the money for whatever your soul desires: cattle, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever your soul asks of you. And then you will eat there before Adonai your God and rejoice, in you and your household. But you are not to neglect the Levite within your gates, for he has no portion or inheritance with you. That's the tithe.
Yep. This is essentially this would actually, in some sense, it's intended to, I guess, replace one of the sacrificial offerings, if you live too far away. And that is the stipulation, is not everybody lives so close to Jerusalem that they could just drag their sheep there and make a sacrifice at the temple. So the idea being that you would sell it, in your hometown, take the money to Jerusalem, and then use it to purchase whatever you need to celebrate the holiday there in Jerusalem.
No, actually, the tithe specifically still, even for you want to be able to go to Jerusalem, but this is actually still a separate tenth from the tenth that you would give to the temple.
Right. It's not the temple tax, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And so this tenth, though, you would take some to the temple, but you're still actually, you're at the temple. You're still meant to eat it and buy whatever you want.
Yes.
With whatever you earn or however you get your just for the context, you go back to verse 22, and so even if you can make it to the temple, you're still meant to have this massive feast and spend all the money on whatever you want. But traditionally, not everyone could make it to the temple in the diaspora, the travel expenses being too large or the journey being too dangerous, what have you, would take it.
Yep.
The extra money they would give, obviously, some of it to a Levite, right? Not to neglect the Levite. And in most cases, they would give the Levite, their portion for the tzedakah, and then the rest of it completely blow it out on whatever for the holiday, and have that same Levite
food,
join
drink,
them for
music,
the holiday and partake in the food and the drink and everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think this year, actually, on that note, I think we may try and actually like roast a goat.
Yeah. As long as we don't do it on an altar and try to make it a sacrifice. And dude, I am if some of you have seen my TikTok, I am so done dealing with that.
Dude, I sent it to Dad. He couldn't finish the video. Like, it made him like legitimately made him sick.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
he basically just took a barbecue pit and called it an altar, and he had a.
He's got the audacity to say that this is, notice, and then I pointed this out to him, actually. He's got the same revelation narrative as Muhammad and Joseph Smith, and it's God told him specifically that he was the new priest, and that just coincidentally his backyard was the place where he wanted to establish his new altar. And it's like, guy.
Yeah, in my response video, for those of you who haven't seen it, I was like, yeah, dude, you are breaking all sorts of like. He claims to be a Torah observer, and then he erected an altar in his backyard, and I was like, dude, you are breaking all sorts of Torah by doing what you're doing, so don't. Yeah, he claimed that he's spiritually a Levite, so that counts. And because I was like, dude, I bet your last name's not Cohen. There's no way. And
right.
He was like, well, God told me I'm a priest now. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, Aaron and his promise and everything written in the Torah, that none of that matters. Cool. Good to go. Take away from the word of God. Awesome.
It's just one of those that it's like, if you're willing to be rude enough, it's easy to refute, because it's like, okay, well, God told me that you're not a priest, so.
Yeah, and in my response video, I was as gentle as I have ever been on the TikTok app.
You really were, though.
I've never been more gentle with a response video. And this guy came at me. Like, you would have thought, if you had not seen my video, you would have thought that I just ripped his head off and he was just not having it. He came right at me and was like, yeah, you're a false teacher. You water everything down, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, It's just funny because everybody else on the other end of the spectrum is like, you're a legalist, you're too strict, you're too learned, you're ignoring the spirit because of your education, and he's like, yeah, you're not. It's just so funny. Man.
What got me was the cross in the background, which oddly enough, the way he films the video, the sun is also in the background right behind the cross, which the cross in and of itself, we'll go ahead and rip this Band-Aid off. That is actually a sun symbol.
Yeah. I mean, it is. That's why the Romans used it to kill people.
Right. It is a sun symbol. It's actually a sexual symbol also. And I can get into that in another video, probably for the Patreon people who are interested in learning about a little bit of the occult history and where it fits into biblical times. But yeah, it's like I saw that and I was like, this is idolatry. Like, this is blatant idolatry.
Like, I largely just ignored the cross issue because I know that's a losing battle with people who put a cross up. That's fine. Whatever. And at the end of this whole back and forth with him, I'm like, you know what? I'm glad that your altar sucks and it's not valid, because if it were and then you put a cross in front of it, well, now you've put a pagan symbol in the midst of a holy object and not okay. So I'm glad that your stuff sucks. Like, I'm glad it's not
right
anywhere near the way that it should look or be dimensionally in its location. I'm glad you're not actually in charge of this whole thing. But anyway, we're We need to back up.
We're deviating.
Back to the tithe. So yeah, Deuteronomy 14:26. Basically, you are commanded, especially for this Sukkot holiday coming up, to take a tenth of your earnings and give some of it to a Levite, if you know one, if you have one who would because especially back then, you got to think the Torah was being written. They're still in the wilderness, and the Levites have no portion in the land, and they know this going in. Right before they enter the land, Deuteronomy basically gets written just before they cross the Jordan, and they know they're not going to get a portion. So all of the other tribes of Israel have land. They can make farms. They can earn living. They can create an economy. And the Levite literally has to live impoverished, and his only job is to do the temple service, and that's not exactly a high-paying job. So the temple tax helps to cover for the Levites, and they're not exactly a small tribe either. And then the temple tax, though, only helps the temple. There are Levites that their job is to go out into the other 12 tribes of Israel and, operate as the priestly role for the other tribes, administering a mikvah, a baptism, things like that. And it was always considered a blessing to have a Levite amongst you, so that he could give you the Aaronic blessing, things like that. And so, but he can't own land and stuff like that. So he lives impoverished. And so, that would be that your temple tax covers the temple, and then your other tenth helps to cover the Levite with you, as well as create this massive, stupidly big holiday, like stupid with an OO, and that's actually the primary focus of tonight's video, really. The holidays are really just a segue, keeping with the theme of being different from the world, right? Mm-hmm. In the world, not of it. The Christian perspective, we hear this a lot, is to abstain from things like drinking and smoking and cursing. And that's really it. That's the only difference that Christians have from the rest of the world, because Christians, they celebrate all the same holidays as the rest of the world. I'm sure we're all aware of the pagan origins of Christmas and Easter, and so these are actually holidays that the Babylonians also celebrated. So as far as the world is concerned, even though you're a Christian, your holidays are no different. The only real difference is your conduct, to an extent, specifically in regards to your common vices, such as alcohol, tobacco, and then stuff like what we in the West would consider cursing.
It's like what Christianity has done is they have simply looked at whatever popular culture is and decided that the opposite of that is what it means to be different. Because it's drinking, smoking, and cursing. Those are the three big ones. But it even extends into, depending on how fundamentalist the church is, the content that you watch on TV, or if you watch TV at all,
True.
or the music that you listen to, the literature that you allow to be read in your household. These are all things that so like the church that I grew up in, it was pretty fundamentalist, not as bad as some, but pretty bad. It was one of those where like the Chronicles of Narnia was cool, but Lord of the Rings was absolutely unacceptable, and Harry Potter was just straight up out of the question. And then for music, anything that had an electric guitar or drums was absolutely sinful.
Yep. And these are all like unsubstantiated biblically.
They're arbitrary standards of holiness. Yeah.
It's entirely man-made standards of holiness. Now, okay, sure, to a certain extent, that might have some spiritual / biblical practical application. But as we're about to talk about, not really.
Right. It's like you're different, but you're not the good kind of different.
Yeah, you're actually different in a way that would be, I would say, it would be robbing a person of a joy that they otherwise would be permitted to engage in. And generally, especially in Judaism, generally speaking, any joy that is not permitted, it's like you're not really supposed to fast from anything like that. Like, you know,
Right.
you're supposed to live joyously. And so as long as it is not explicitly forbidden, well, then it's not forbidden.
Then it's permitted.
Yeah, it's entirely permitted. You know, of course, there are limitations, right? And I say this a lot. I did a smoking tobacco TikTok a while ago, and main point of that was any and all addictive behavior is bad behavior.
Absolutely.
And that's true with things that...
Like, that's
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's one of the things about, about modern church culture is like, yeah, they'll really talk on alcoholism and the addictiveness of tobacco, but they don't want to talk about the fact that their son spends 6 hours playing Minecraft, or like there are other addictive behaviors that.
Yeah.
An addiction is an addiction. It doesn't matter what it is or what it's chemically doing to your body or your brain. And that really is kind of where a lot of people try and draw the line, is that, okay, so tobacco chemically affects your body. And it's like, well, video games chemically affect your brain.
So does
like
caffeine.
It's right. There's no way around the fact that external stimuli, be it visual, auditory, or something that you imbibe, any kind of stimuli is going to have a physical effect on you internally.
Yep. Or
And I think there's something to be said for that, actually.
What? Say that last.
I said I think there's something to be said for that, because the fact that it affects you internally, regardless of what form of stimuli it embodies itself. It's still going to affect you internally, be it physically, mentally, psychologically. I think that's very telling as to the fact that it is affecting you spiritually also.
Yeah, and basically, there are things that are obviously permitted that culturally we don't consider wrong, but they can be addictive, and it still is a negative behavior. It affects you negatively, and it's actually a negative trait. I think and like I said, any and all addictive behavior, I think is looked down upon. Just we as a culture, as a Western culture, have molded a certain view of certain addictions, and we've okayed some and shunned others when they're virtually the same in their nature. And drinking is one of those things, right? You and I, being addicted to alcohol and it affecting your life. If you're like beating your significant other and you're just a mean drunk, you probably need to stay away from the bottle for a good minute, and know your limitations.
Absolutely.
And being a drunkard is explicitly forbidden, but having a drink is not. And and enjoying yourself, I would say rocking a buzz, that's not explicitly forbidden in the same way that rocking a buzz from caffeine is not explicitly forbidden. Although I will say, interesting fact of history, the Muslims in like the 1700s banned coffee from them, religiously banned coffee, because you would get a caffeine buzz. And so they compared it to alcohol and said, yeah, no caffeine. So coffee for a little bit in the Muslim world was actually forbidden. And it didn't last long because, of course, logic ruled out. And they were like, well, it stimulates you in a good way. It keeps you up at night, which means you can study more Quran. And they were like, oh, that's a good point. And so it didn't last.
The idea of something that alters your perception or your conscious perception, I guess you would say, things that do that are not inherently forbidden. That's not an inherently forbidden experience. Even when it comes to, we briefly brought it up, Yom Kippur, right? And the fast. Going without even, because that's still a form of stimuli or lack thereof. that it takes to maintain normality, right? So your normal state of being is one that is fed when you're hungry, right? And so you are still altering your state of perception, your conscious state of perception, when you go without what is normal. When you go without sleep, you will start to experience an altered state of perception. When you go without food and water for too long, you'll experience an altered state of perception. These are not experiences that are forbidden,
Yeah.
right? Be it because you went without or because you imbibed. But when it becomes a problem, when it becomes an addiction and something that is actually ruling over you, that's when it becomes, that's when you've crossed a line of where it does become forbidden.
Yeah.
So like you said, rockin' a buzz. That's why I bring that up. Like rockin' a buzz. Like, yeah, no, you're intended to for Sukkot to imbibe alcohol to raise your ability to experience the joy of the holiday. Like that's the whole purpose to that, is so that you can have an amplified experience of joy for the holiday.
Yeah. Let
Um,
your hair down.
that's the whole
Relax,
purpose.
let loose. I love the. I just want to bring this up real quickly. I love the whole. Well, wine back then was watered down. It's not nearly as alcoholic as it is today. Okay, that's fine, but the verse in Deuteronomy 14 still says strong drink. So clearly, strong drink.
Yeah, strong drink is
existed.
liquor.
And so even if wine was watered down, we'll say, because we can prove to an extent that beer in the Netherlands, when it was given as a payment in the ancient days, was like 1 or 2% alcohol. But wine is so much more fermented.
Yeah, I was
and
gonna say they
so
still
even
had
watered
mead
down
back
wine
then,
would
too.
be 5% at the very least. And then you have the
Right,
strong drink
right.
issue.
And actually, there were even certain cultures, particularly within the Middle East. Like I don't know if watering down wine was as common in the Eastern cultures. We know that the Greeks watered down their wine, but see, the Greeks then looked to the Scythians and considered them to be madmen because they didn't water down their wine. Like they were known for their ability to hold their drink.
Yeah, no, there are some cultures that did water it down, and to what extent we don't really know. And I mean, really, all whiskey today is watered down, all of it. When you distill
Yeah.
whiskey, you have to cut that with water, otherwise you have basically 90% alcohol, and that's no. So 40% alcohol by volume is literally half water. So that's a lot of water in what would otherwise be just pure whiskey. And
Yep.
so like pure wines, same thing. If we're talking like 15-17% naturally, and you cut that with some water, you're still, rocking an 8 to 7%. Yeah, but all that aside, again, you have to contend with the fact that the verse also mentions strong drink, right? So there's obviously an implication
Yep.
of a much stronger thing than just beer or wine. And so that's a stigma, of course, that we get often. We'd like to get rid of, because beer.
I think personally, it hurts witness too.
Yeah.
You're depriving yourself of opportunity to witness to people. Now, I understand that there are certain pastors and church groups they're totally down with going into a bar to preach. And that probably, if I had to guess, as a bar going person myself, I would say that probably annoys more of the people in the bar more than anything, because I don't imagine that these pastors and church groups actually partake of anything alcoholic when they go there. And so that's where like the difference that you're portraying is one that is actually negative given the atmosphere, and it's off-putting to people. See, I can go to the bar and sit and enjoy a beer and have a fella sit down next to me, and this has happened on multiple occasions actually, where we strike up a conversation and somehow it moves around to spiritual things, and they're more willing to listen to me because I'm there having a drink with them, right? I'm a real person to them. I'm not somebody who's pretending to be like I'm better than them.
Yeah, and again, we're not, of course, advocating that you go and partake in a sin in order to win sinners. We're saying that drinking specifically is not a sin, and it's okay to just go to a bar and be a normal person. And like, being different from the world biblically means celebrating the Bible holidays while the rest of the world doesn't. There are parts of
Right.
being different from the world that are in the opposite, in the wrong direction, and we think that one of those would be total abstinence from drinking unless you have a problem. Like if you honestly have a no crap problem, I'm all about it, dude. Do what you need to do to keep yourself from getting out of control and creating a stumbling block for yourself. All about that.
Right.
But there's nothing keeping you from just being a guy at a bar, trying to have a drink, and then striking a conversation with a person and using that opportunity as a normal person to, if it comes up in conversation, bring it up and then be a witness in that case. And a lot people respond better to you when you're not trying to be so pushy. Usually they respond better, especially when they raise the question first and you're just answering questions. And when you're there having a drink and then they're asking you questions, they are so much more open than if you're there with a Bible in hand and you're having a water and you're going around and you're preaching at people. Completely, you're going to be received adversely.
There's an extreme difference between being at the bar and sipping on a club soda with your WWJD bracelet and crucifix necklace. These are things that half the people in the bar themselves probably have, and they're not going to ask about these things because it's really not different. And like I said, the going out of one's way to abstain from being what is just generally in the world today considered a normal person is off-putting. Whereas when you and I go into a bar and we're wearing our tzitzit, but we're acting like normal people. We go there, we order a drink, we have our drink, and maybe we're having a conversation together about, I don't know, something political or religious. Usually we're talking about something like this. Somebody may ask what the tzitzit are. Okay, well, why? Because that's actually different, right? People don't see tzitzit every day. And so they ask what they are. Okay, we explain what they are and how it's in the Bible. Now we have a conversation started, and they're actually genuinely interested in what the Bible has to say. Why? Well, because we're on their level. We're a normal person to them. But there's something different about us, something that's truly unrecognizable. And so they want to talk about it.
Different enough that most people don't even know what tzitzit are. And that's my favorite holy thing is the tzitzit.
Yes.
Most Christians, most pastors. I attended Liberty University residentially for the better part of 3 years. And I still go to Lynchburg all the time, at least once a month. And never once have I met anyone at Liberty University on campus, other than another Jew who was wearing them himself, did I ever meet a Christian who knew what I was wearing. But we know for a fact Jesus wore them, and he wore them all the time. It's like Bible 101 for most Jews, and not a single Christian on campus ever recognized them. And that's so crazy to me, but also that means the rest of the world doesn't know what they are either, And it's a great witness because Jesus did wear them, and that gives you an opportunity to talk about that.
So would you say that is a way that is different, so much so that it's even different from Christianity? So It actually presents an opportunity to teach both Christians and non-Christians because it's that different.
Yep. I would say, I equally talk to Christians as much as I do atheists about the tzitzit. It's split right down the middle because nobody knows what they are. Unless you grew up in like Crown Heights around that area and you're like, oh yeah, that guy's probably a Jew guy. Yeah, but not everyone's from Crown Heights, New York, so. But even go ahead.
No. Go. You go.
I was gonna say kind of to segue into the smoking and drinking aspect of this conversation. But real quick, we just got a question in the comments that I do want to address real quickly. Should women wear them? And that depends on who you ask, honestly. And it depends on what you mean by tzitzit as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I would say the general understanding within Orthodox Judaism the answer would be no, at least not in the traditional sense. There would be a less traditional more unconventional way in which it would be acceptable for women to wear them.
Yeah. So,
Um,
and when I say it depends on who you ask, because even within Orthodoxy, Rashi made his daughters wear tzitzit, but not on a talit gadol. The talit gadol itself
Right.
is seen as a man's garment, so women would otherwise not be permitted to wear a talit gadol because that would be cross-dressing, right? And even though it may not look like cross-dressing to us, this is a very cultural thing, and so it's considered cross-dressing, especially in its time period. But women would always wear some sort of head covering. It would be like a scarf. And so Rashi would have his daughters put tzitzit on the corners of the scarves for their head coverings, because that's a very feminine
and
clothing that has four corners. And so if they do want to wear the tzitzit on a four-cornered garment that covers them, right, the keyword being covered, then they can do it on the head covering. And so,
and that's what I meant by less traditional and more unconventional.
yeah, and I would still like it's because Rashi, there's a record that Rashi did let his daughters do that, and so it would be considered traditional in a sense, but do understand just for the guy, for the commenter, most of Orthodox Judaism still doesn't do that, and so it's not forbidden. It's not commanded either. It's more or less seen as a commandment that women are not required.
Right. It's not obligatory for women.
Yeah. Mostly because the command is actually given in the masculine. So it's seen as a pretty masculine specific commandment. Rather than saying children of Israel, it says sons of Israel, right? So that's kind of the idea. But again, everyone has their opinion. Where there are two Jews, there are three opinions, right?
Right, for sure. But yeah, so you were going to segue into the idea of is from drinking into, I guess, smoking and cursing.
Yep. So drinking, we know, is a big part of the Hebrew culture. You have wine every Sabbath day. Every holiday requires a drink of wine, and weddings and everything, wine. So drinking is a big part of the Jewish culture, especially in Jesus' time. But now let's get around to the cussing. This is my favorite one.
I was thinking we would go smoking first before cussing, because that's my favorite too. So I figured we would save that for last.
So you want to do smoking first then?
Yeah, let's go smoking.
Okay, let's talk about that one. You lead the way since you ruined my segue.
Well, okay. So real quick, we have another question in the comments. So I guess real quick, to answer why we have not answered the question yet is because it's off topic from the subject that we're currently discussing. But I think I can say that Seamus and I will definitely be making probably a patron exclusive video pertaining to who the elect are. Yeah. It's definitely going to be part of our Revelation series, which should be coming up here maybe next year sometime, early next year.
When you say early next year, do you mean after Tuesday? Because that's the next year.
I don't know. We'll talk about how soon we want to start.
I keep God's calendar. I don't care about this Gregorian Catholic mess.
Absolutely, because that's a spectacular question. Who are the elect? That's not a question for even just one episode. That's a question that you answer over a span of different episodes, because it's a broad question.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's a web, right? And that question plucks a part of the web that shakes a lot of the other parts of the web. So we actually kind of have to build into that question. Yeah.
There's a lot of moving parts to that one.
Yeah.
But we for sure will answer it. You are a patron supporter, and we are so grateful for it. We're not ignoring you. We're just trying to stay on topic for the episode for now. We appreciate you
so much more than you understand.
and we will be making probably exclusively for patrons an episode outlining that. If not multiple. So and it will be answered.
For those of you who are watching who aren't patrons, if you become one, you can, and this is on our page, you can suggest any topics that you would like to have answered. and we will exclusively do a video based on your question on the Patreon page. So if this is like very much like, you know, a $1 a month, and you get one-on-one with us as much as we are able. So, and we appreciate, again, every single one of y'all. It means so much to us that anyone would be willing to give us anything. And so, you know, just thank you very much. We're not ignoring you. We love you. But yeah, so let's talk about the smoking. And
right, because we both enjoy cigars
so much,
a lot.
Yep, I had one last night. I had an Ave Maria, the Templar.
Oh
yeah.
See, I'm thinking about ordering a box just for Sukkot too.
Oh,
we should do that. We should throw in together for a box just for Sukkot.
Yes, I'll order it tonight, and you can just
espadas.
Oh, it's okay. We're doing
done.
that.
It's done deal.
I'll
done
order
deal.
them tonight, and then you
espadas.
just send me the other half, and we'll call it even.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, but so that's our segue. We're gonna be smoking for Sukkot.
Yeah. Not on the Sabbath day, but during Sukkot, definitely during the holiday. Because we'll be spending a whole week out in the mountains in the beautiful part of God's country.
Yes. But yeah, so this is one that actually, some people bring up that it's harmful to your health, right? And so that seems to be a very good objection from which to build an argument, even biblically, right? Because you certainly shouldn't be doing anything that's harmful to yourself. And you get the body is a temple, right? We come to that argument, which, you know, the independent fundamental Baptists, they love that one, but they never consider that gluttony is a sin.
So I love that particular one. I've made this joke before on my TikTok, where, well, if your body is a holy temple, there is an incense altar in the temple. So,
yes.
So I mean, like, you kind of have to smoke now, like, in order to be
right.
And it's a joke. I mean that entirely in jest, but.
But yeah, it's the thing is, sure, you could say that smoking is hazardous to your health, especially with all of the additional chemicals other than the tobacco that is being put into modern cigarettes today. But there are still more natural means of tobacco that you can use for cigarettes that are not as bad for you. And I think at that point, again, used in moderation, I certainly don't see anything wrong with it. It's a reprieve from stress, and look, if it's going to relieve stress is the number one killer.
It's the number one thing that makes you age.
If you're doing a little bit of damage to your lungs so that you can alleviate a lot of damage being done to your psyche, I think that's okay.
I mean, there's an extent where let me go ahead and clarify. I don't like cigarettes at all. Period. I don't anything that's like manufactured with tons of chemicals and garbage. Not about that, right? Modern day cigarettes are garbage. Now, what are those Native American ones? The really naturals. I don't smoke enough, so I'll never know the answer to this.
Yeah, no, it's not the Cheyennes.
No, but it's
those are those really cheap flavored ones, I think. The one of the fellas at your wedding, is it I think it might be Spirits. Yeah, one of the fellas who was at your wedding at the Hamiltons. He gave me one because like he rolls his own. He just gets the tobacco and he rolls it, and so like he gave me one, and it was a different experience from a normal cigarette.
Yeah.
I'm revealing part of my past here to everybody. I don't currently smoke cigarettes now, but there was a time in my life where I did smoke semi-regularly. I wasn't even as much as a pack a day. One pack might last me 3 days, but you know, I did imbibe in cigarettes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I could even tell it was a cleaner smoke.
Yeah.
And it was nice actually. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, so nicotine, yes. Nicotine does have an addictive factor, but understand that the nicotine alone is not what gets you addicted. It's a lot like caffeine in that if you do it enough, you start to have a withdrawal from it because you're just used to having it, just like caffeine is, right? So it's really no different from caffeine. It's just a different effect from the caffeine. It's when these manufacturers put tons of other crap in it that make it more addictive, that's designed to pull you in and hook you in just on the first cigarette. That's the stuff, and it's like totally bad for you, 100% unhealthy. I don't like cigarettes at all. Like, I'm not about it. And again, any and all addictive behavior is frowned upon, right? So I think smoking cigarettes habitually is still kind of a frowned upon practice, and this is just my personal opinion. And this kind of plays in because you and I, we have cigars, but we have cigars like ultra rarely. You know, I'll have a cigar maybe at most once a week, but never more than that.
Yeah.
And it's usually after Sabbath day or something like that, where, you know, we can light a fire again, and I just have the rest of the night to myself, and I'm enjoying a fine whiskey, and I just want to have a nice, you know, cigar. Tobacco is just tobacco. It's just aged in a barrel usually and rolled by hand, the stuff that we get anyway. It's way more natural.
I've pretty much limited myself to holidays. Like, I've pretty much just limited myself to holidays at this point. I don't even really have one. Maybe one,
man.
not even once a month anymore. Right.
Yeah.
But it's a kosher law. And it's different because you also don't inhale cigar smoke.
Yes.
At least you're not supposed to.
Don't. But yeah, you're not supposed to. So they say that if you smoke a cigar, it's equal to smoking an entire pack of cigarettes. That's true if you inhale it. If you don't inhale it, you'll absorb some nicotine through your gums, right? So there is especially if you kind of like, what I'll usually do is I'll take a puff. I don't inhale, but I'll draw it in, and I'll use my tongue to kind of swish it around and taste it before letting it go, and that's a little bit of the nicotine will get absorbed into your gums, but it's so substantially low that by the time you've finished your whole cigar, you might have had one cigarette's worth of nicotine in your system from a whole huge cigar.
I don't even think that.
Like, I don't know about you, but you know, I don't until I've basically finished the cigar, I don't feel a nicotine buzz.
Right, it's something that's pretty much when you're finished.
Yeah, when the nicotine hits your lungs, it hits your system way faster in a way more concentrated form. But through your gums, it's not nearly the same.
And the FDA, correct me if I'm wrong, they've actually had to pull cigars off of their tobacco warning.
They did. Yep. Because they kept
specifically
saying that
because like it's
in connection with lung cancer and mouth cancer, and they actually had to remove it because studies show that cigars, when removed from the equation, because what they used to do is just all tobacco products, and then they would say tobacco products cause, and then whatever list. And so they included cigars into that list because it was a tobacco product. But when you break down which tobacco products do what, cigars don't do much of anything. And the cigar community was like really tired of this negative stigma that was being applied to just a regular natural, you know, plant that's not really causing all these problems. And eventually, the FDA actually did remove and relent, saying that those studies don't reflect how a cigar works. And so, for those numbers now, cigars are no longer part of those numbers because they don't actually affect the numbers.
Right.
Yeah, and Dennis Prager goes over this in a video. If you want to check out, you know, Prager University, he does have a video going over the better details of some of that if you're interested. But it's kosher. Explain to me why.
Absolutely. So me, actually, I have not actually studied why. I know it's kosher, but I don't know the how or why.
Seed-bearing
so
plant.
You would be better for. Oh, okay, that makes sense. I mean, so that's a funny thing because that's one that actually I bring up a lot when it comes to the marijuana argument, right? Because again, just like anything else, I think overuse is certainly a terrible thing. But I'm one of those people that, like, you know, whenever somebody talks about other people who are doing weed drugs, I'm all like, okay, are they doing weed or are they doing drugs? Because those are not the same thing. and it's, you get people who view THC and marijuana as being like, like right up there with heroin and crack and everything, and it's like, no, no, no. There is a broad spectrum of what we call narcotics, and there's like what's very much closer to the alcohol tobacco side, and then there's what's like way on the harder side. And marijuana's like right here bordering the alcohol and tobacco side, at least in my opinion.
Basically, funky tobacco.
And right, I think the majority of the scientific community would agree with me on that assessment. And it's one of those things where, okay, so you could make the argument against smoking it because of damage to your lungs, right? But it's a seed-bearing plant, which means it can be eaten for food. And as I understand, the edibles actually do. They're more potent than just smoking it. So it's like, look, biblically, this is a non-starter argument for you. And I understand that even in Orthodox Judaism, halakhically, it was forbidden. However, that has come to a level of dispute, as I understand, even in certain schools of thought of Judaism. So Rav Dror specifically has got a video where he addresses it, and he says, look, there are certain things that cause a heightened state of awareness, whereupon, there are certain people, I guess, that he would say need that to make a spiritual connection or to receive whatever God is trying to guide them to. And I can say that is pretty true for me. Again, revealing a little bit about my past life here. I wouldn't be here right now, in actively, part of alternate media, if it weren't for one particular time that I was like absolutely stoned out of my mind. And it was a point where I was really just stuck in my head and doing a lot of self-reflection, and there was a moment where I realized in that state of mind that I was definitely not the person that I wanted to be, and had actually become the kind of person that I used to abhor the most. And it was a big wake-up call moment. And so I am here as living proof that yes, there are certain states of spiritual awareness that whatever message you're supposed to receive, you're not going to receive it outside of being in that state of mind. So I definitely don't write it off as a bad thing. I definitely can understand how it's abused, and there are certain people who have a dependency on it.
Yeah.
And that, again, goes into the addictive behavior.
Yep.
And it's, just like anything else, it's something that, because it does impair you in some way. So certainly don't operate any machinery or vehicles or anything on it, but I don't think it's an inherently bad thing. And again, if we look at it biblically, it's a non-starting argument.
I see it as more of a medicinal. I've never partaken myself in because I'm a Marine, and I also work in the security sector, and so I stay away from it anyway. But like, I recently just had hand surgery. My rods are still in. And they gave me opiates to help cope with the pain. And opiates obviously are incredibly illegal unless it's being used medicinally. And they gave me I think they gave me 7 days worth of opiates to help cope with the initial pain after the surgery. And I only took one to help sleep that very first night, because I couldn't get to sleep that first night. But I try to stay away from stuff like that, because I don't have an addictive personality. I'm pretty confident that if I were to partake in something, I would be able to stop and have the self-control. I feel like I've demonstrated that with alcohol, with tobacco, with anything else that would otherwise be considered a vice. But I don't like chancing it with the hard manufactured stuff, right? Like, tobacco is natural.
Yep.
You can grow that easily, dry it out, roll it up, light it. I mean, you're not doing anything crazy to create a drug. But opiates, that's manufactured. Yeah, it comes from a plant, but you don't just take poppy, you manufacture the opiate. Now, I'm just not about that stuff. So
Right. And I am very much the same. So they pretty much did the same thing for me when I had my appendix removed. They gave me a week long, like it was like a week's worth of prescription for not Vicodin. What's the other one?
Valium,
Percocet.
Percocet. Yep.
Yeah, Percocet, and I didn't even turn it in, because the pain, which admittedly, I have a higher than average pain tolerance, and that's something that I get from probably my dad's side of the family. Because my grandmother even has an ungodly high pain tolerance. She scares me. um, but yeah, so like I figured, okay, this pain is tolerable enough to where like an Advil will help me get through the first night, and after that I'll probably be okay. So I never even turned in the prescription. Actually, I just trashed
Yeah,
that.
like whatever.
Because I thought the same way. It's like, man, I have known enough people who have been addicted to pain pills,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to go down that path.
Especially Percocet. Like that's a pretty common one, and that's actually what they gave me. They gave me Percocets. I still have them as proof that I never used them. And actually, when you don't use them, like after you get these pulled out, if you didn't use them, you're supposed to turn them back into the hospital so they can dispose of them properly. And I kind of can't wait to do that. I hate even having it here, just in case anything happens, where like the cops show up. And they're like,
Right.
what are they used for? And I'm like, this, but yeah. So as far as like tobacco, like to kind of, and then get into cursing real quick because we're kind of running a little over. It's a kosher plant, right? So consuming it, and that's the other thing. Consuming it via the mouth is really how it reads, more or less. Like it doesn't have to be eaten, technically, and so you can technically consume a tobacco via smoke. But even then, you're not like really consuming it if you don't inhale, which we don't. I have a cigar on occasion. I don't inhale. The nicotine level in natural tobaccos like pipe tobacco or a cigar, the nicotine's really no different from caffeine. And
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's only as harmful as caffeine is.
yeah,
Like, and that was an interesting thing to learn, especially when the whole vaping thing started. That was a big thing in the vaping world. As people would say, well, that'll still give you cancer, and it's like, well, no, it's not the nicotine in cigarettes that gives you cancer.
yeah, it's the everything else.
And yeah, like caffeine tobacco or nicotine in and of itself is only as harmful to your body as caffeine is.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was another thing, like the whole vaping thing, and everybody who was so against the vaping. That whole stigma I thought was hilarious because, since at the time I was pretty tight with the vape shop that I used to buy my products from. So I had been in the back room there, and I have made those vape juices myself. I know exactly what chemicals go into them. And so you get people who talk about, well, it's all the same chemicals and all the same juices and everything. And it's like, well, no, if you go to some like sketchy gas station and get some off-brand stuff, you might get something with some wacky chemicals in it that are going to make you sick. But like most of the local shops and stuff like that, that make their own juices, it's vegetable glycerin, which we eat in food all the time.
Food grade.
And propylene glycol, and everybody will say, well, that's in antifreeze.
Okay.
You don't want to be vaping antifreeze, and it's like, yeah, but it's also in many inhalers for asthmatics.
Yep.
So there are people who are already vaping it. Like,
an inhaler is just baby vapes. Let's be real.
right.
Vaping is just a way more visible inhaler.
Right.
But yeah, so I think, again, and I cannot stress this enough, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. We do not condone addictive behavior, and we do not condone factory cigarettes. We're all about the regular, natural, not screwed with, not like super weirdly manufactured and laced, just natural rolled by hand tobacco in the form of either, a cigar or loosely like a pipe tobacco, something like that. And, don't inhale. Some people do, and I'm not like totally against inhaling. Kind of just depends on how much. Everything in moderation, and if it leads to an addiction, and you can't control that, then stop. That if it ever becomes like an addictive thing that starts to tear your life down or change it in an adverse way, absolutely stop. Like, even if it is cigars, so what might be okay for some people is not going to be okay for everybody. And I think the Torah makes room for that. And that's why Paul talks about like stumbling blocks and like the weaker in faith, where there are some issues that are just not explicitly prohibited in the Torah that really depend on the person.
One of the most eye-opening experiences that I ever had with respect to so many things, actually. First of all, Judaism. It was a very eye-opening experience in the way that prayer works in Judaism, but also with respect to the subject of smoking, especially. And being that Sukkot is coming up again, this is just apropos. So there is a movie called Ushpizin. That Ushpizin is house guest, I guess is what it, or guest, I guess is what it would translate to, because it. I guess for Sukkot there are certain sects of Judaism that like that's what they pray for is a guest to expose this holiday to.
Yep.
So anyway, I'm not going to give the whole synopsis of the movie. I will say I highly recommend it, and I recommend for anybody who's walking the path of Torah to watch it. But there's a particular scene where the main character in question, his wife, they've fallen on hard times, financial struggles. They want to be able to afford to celebrate the holiday to its fullest. And then they get, house guests on top of that. And, oh joy, a miracle happens. They wind up able to do this and to provide. And so the wife is just utterly overjoyed by this. And so after I think it's the first night of their celebration, she is out on the balcony in this scene of the movie, and she is smoking a cigarette. And you can tell that she's talking to someone. She's looking and gesturing as though she's having a conversation with someone, and just talking about how wonderful they are to her and how much she loves them. And you think that she's speaking to her husband this whole time, right? And that's the way that it looks, because the camera's very close up on her, and she's smoking a cigarette the whole time, just casually smoking a cigarette, just adoring her husband is what it looks like. And then the camera pans out, like way out, and you see that she's alone and she's praying. Like this is like she is actively praying, casually smoking a cigarette, just lavishing these adorings onto Hashem in this moment. And it was such an eye-opening experience to see that.
I remember when you showed me that movie, you made me watch it because you were like, if we're going to be friends, you have to watch this movie.
You have to see this. Yes.
I remember that. But yeah, it's just a beautiful way of like prayer is you communicating with God. It's having a conversation. It's not just you asking for things. That's a different topic for a different episode. But I think all that to say, generally speaking, I actually don't know how far back the practice of smoking tobacco goes in history. That's actually something I want to look into now. But yeah, generally speaking, Judaism has never really taken a hard stance against tobacco products. There are some sects that do, of course, but really it's just sort of seen in the same light that we're trying to make it out to be, right? So addictive behavior, no go, factory made, all that other garbage is garbage, right? So yeah, if you're somebody like myself or Brad and you like to partake in some of the finer things that are on God's green earth, and you actually, man, you'd be surprised at how much your money goes when you buy like a cigar. You are really helping to pay for people in poor countries to have a job that pays less than minimum wage, but it's something.
Yes. And
your money does go to that. And so, you're not supporting slavery. You're because these companies actually have a lot of strict rules against certain things. That's why we're allowed to like have certain cigars in America. And for the longest time, we couldn't have Cubans because, there was the embargo, and part of that embargo is because it was basically slave labor, and you shouldn't profit from that. So rest assured, if you're buying a
Yep.
cigar in America, most likely you're buying it from a reputable company that's doing their best to try and provide a life for their cigar rollers. And so you purchasing that kind of helps to go and pay for a family's meal. I'm all about it, you know.
And that actually is so. That's something that my abuelita has done for um, a long time, as long as I can remember, actually. Um, I've given a little bit away here too. For those of you who didn't know, I am Hispanic.
What?
My grandmother and father migrated to this country from Cuba, and I still have a lot of family still in Cuba. And for as long as I can remember, my grandmother has always taken pretty regular trips, either annually or biannually, or sometimes there might be a longer stretch, but pretty regular trips to Cuba to see her family that is there. Because even though there's been an embargo, if you like are from there or you have family there, you're still allowed to go and visit. Um, and so she will always bring back, if she can afford it when she's visiting, she'll bring back a couple of boxes of like real deal Cuban cigars, and sell them here and send the money back to the family there. And that's something that she's done forever. And she doesn't smoke them.
Yeah, she gives them to
She
us.
still feels that smoking is a little taboo, but it's to her it's helping the family.
Yeah, yeah. I remember talking to you about it when Abuelita was giving it, because obviously she's like, I don't like that you guys smoke it, but the money really helps. So we're like handing her like $500 worth of money to go and send to other families.
Yeah, like give me those.
And she's like, yeah, I hate that you guys do it, but thank you so much for your money. So,
Right.
um,
Well, yeah, because I mean, and that goes a long way for them too.
oh
I mean,
yeah,
a lot of people just don't really know exactly how poor they are there.
yeah,
But yeah, it's like any other war-torn country.
yeah. And so I think tobacco is kind of out of the way now. Those darned curse words.
Wordy dirds.
Hey, this is the part where if you might have kids in the room or something like that, maybe you're listening to this with, we're going to do our best to be as cordial and professional as possible with regards to what we're going to say, but especially to my European viewers, there may be some words that we'll use as an example to Americans that would otherwise not know better. And so if you're a European and you have kids in the
Right.
car and you're listening to this, maybe be careful about this next part.
Well, and I would even say also for those in America, the examples that we give may be of such that you may not want your children to hear it. So
Yeah, just a fair warning.
So-
Again, we're going to be as professional as possible, like PG-13, basically. But yeah, every parent's a little different, and so I just want to respect that and at least warn people that there might be some things. And so, anyway, trigger warning. Moving
Right.
on.
one I think we can open up initially by saying, and for our TikToks and for our content, for pretty much everything we do try and maintain a professional ambiance.
Yeah.
And so we typically abstain from using profanity in any of our content. However, I think I can speak for both of us when I say that we're certainly not above using profanity in day-to-day life.
It certainly depends on the company that you are with. And so,
Yes.
before we get into that, let's talk about the prohibitions when it comes to the cursing, right? So typically, your Christian interpretation of this is, you can't. The Bible says you can't curse your fellow man, right? So there's no cursing, like that kind of language is more or less prohibited, and we see this especially with fundamental churches, even going so far as saying stuff like heck and stupid being considered curse words depending on the family. So that's your
Yep.
typical Christian way of going about that one. And we would like to propose that historically, biblically, and culturally, those are not true.
Right. When the Bible commands not to curse someone, this is in a way, you could even say it's connected to a prohibition against witchcraft, because it's literally saying you are not to pronounce a curse on your fellow man.
Yeah, actually,
Like you're not to wish any evil on him.
I just read this in the Shulchan Aruch the other day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Against the prohibition of cursing, they clarify in the Shulchan. For those of you who may not know, the Shulchan Aruch is actually like a summary of the entire Talmud, squeezed with all of like the final rulings. And so instead of like partaking in the whole conversation, they just give you the conclusions. And so it's the Shulchan. It means preparing the table, Shulchan Aruch. And so it's just all the stuff. Like if you're the guy who only wants the answers and not really interested in the conversation, the Shulchan is perfect. And anyway, I was reading the Shulchan, and this prohibition is specifically against trying to invoke heaven to enact justice. You are forbidden from invoking the divine intervention. That's how they. That's how the Jewish people
it's
in history have.
It's a prohibition. Yeah, it's a prohibition against saying things like, may God strike you.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yep. To literally pronounce a curse. To say things like,
yes,
may you burn in the depths of Sheol or whatever,
may your name be blotted out.
Yeah. To curse, right?
There's only.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say there's only one name that's ever said about in Judaic literature pretty regularly. Well, in some Judaic literature.
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to.
And that would be, it would depend on who you talk to. But Satan. There's some schools of thought that whenever they mention, whenever they mention, Hashem or the Lord, it's may His name be praised. You always follow it with that. And then so there are some schools of thought where, anytime that you mention Hashatan, it's may His name be blotted out, right?
Yep. And so, but yeah, just culturally speaking, though, like what we consider a swear word. So let's get away from the word curse, because we've established that a curse is to pronounce some type of divine intervention negatively to enact justice or vengeance, right? Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. So to pronounce a curse on anybody, it's forbidden by the Torah. So a swear word is a purely cultural construct.
Yes.
Hebrew doesn't have any swear words. And that is to say, there is no cultural word in Hebrew that they considered a word that you should not say. That's not to say that you cannot curse in Hebrew, because you absolutely can. But there are no words in Hebrew that are like, you don't say that word, like there is in English. Like the F word, we tend to think you're not supposed to say that word because that word is a bad word. There are no words like that in Hebrew. They don't treat a certain word with that kind of treatment. But it's definitely a curse word, like what we would consider a swear word. It's definitely a swear word, but it's not. They don't treat it like it is in the same way that we do. So Hebrew doesn't actually have swear words. Modern Hebrew has a completely different altogether. There's different. Modern Hebrew is basically different enough from the biblical Hebrew that most modern Hebrew speakers have a hard time reading the Tanakh, in the same way that most English speakers have a hard time reading a 1611 King James Bible. It's like that different. But yeah, so my favorite example of this, it's purely cultural, right? So again, for my European viewers, be careful. I may say something that might offend you. So I'm from Ireland, right? So I have a very Irish background.
Before you continue, okay, I just want to weigh in on my our American followers here. You see the level with which Seamus is giving a heads up to the Europeans, right? This should really, really impress on you, because you're going to think it's ridiculous when you hear it. But this should really, really impress on you exactly how cultural, colloquial, and regional profanity is, right? He is giving these warnings as though he's about to drop the F-bomb.
It's worse.
And with that, continue.
Okay. So, culturally, for those of you who don't know much about Europe, some of you may know this, but here's the word, so stand by. Ready? fanny. That's the word. You never say that. You don't say that in Ireland. That it doesn't mean what you think it means here in America. Americans usually think this means your buttocks or something like that. That's not at all what it means in Ireland. If you say, I'm going to say it again, if you say fanny in Ireland, you have dropped the, I mean, like, Americans think the C word is bad. It's about the same weight. In fact, it means the same thing.
Right.
The word fanny in Ireland means the same thing as the C word here. And in Ireland, the C word is not really considered a cultural curse word. It's
just English.
We use it in our
it's just
everyday
common
conversation.
everyday English.
It's a basic level insult at best. But Americans hear it and they are completely taken aback by it. And then vice versa.
Worst word you can say.
Yeah. Swear words are incredibly cultural to their background. Right. So.
Right.
And even with that being said, Yeshua cursed what we would consider swearing, and Paul definitely did what we would consider swearing.
Well, even John the Baptist also. One of the most common ones that we hear, like brood of vipers or sons of vipers or sons of your father the devil, and this, right? These would have been the equivalent of SOB, right? In their day.
Yeah.
Like that's very strong language to use. But even more to lend to that, one that we here in America are going to be much more familiar with, is Rupert Grint, for those of you who have seen Harry Potter, the actor who played Ron Weasley, right? Now, for those of you who have seen the movies, Ron Weasley, all throughout the movie, from the age of 11 upward, was saying bloody this and bloody that, like the whole way through the movie. And when asked, like, what his favorite line was throughout the whole series, he said, I thought it was really cool that I got to say bloody a lot. And that's because to him, that's a bad word.
Yep, that's a curse word.
That's not a word that you say every day. That's an American stereotype that we view the English as just saying bloody all the time.
Yeah, but that's considered swearing over there. I tend to tell people that you'd be surprised that if you go to Ireland and watch some of the TV to find that they don't censor the F word.
Because to them, it's just, and this is one thing that I love the comparison, right? Because it really, the use of it actually it brings it down to the level that it actually is in Europe, and that's like the show Game of Thrones, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the show is you can say is terrible for a number of other reasons, but profanity is not one of them, and that's because the way that they use profanity in Game of Thrones is such that it is just normal everyday English. It's not considered base speech. It's not considered, right? This it's more akin, and Seamus, you'll be able to confirm this more so, but it's more akin to the way that they speak in Europe.
Yeah, it's not shocking. It's shocking to us, to Americans, but it's not. That's normal, right? So, like you said with bloody, it's a good example. Another one I find that was really funny because we had a pub when I used to live next to you. There's a pub in the area, and I hated saying the name of this pub because where I come from in Ireland, the title of this pub is a swear word, and it was called Spunky McDougal's, and the word spunky or spunk is a European colloquial dirty word. It's incredible. I don't even like saying it now. I used to laugh at the name of this pub because it's like, wow, they have no idea, because it's an Irish pub. So right, so you'd think the Irish colloquialism might be known to them, totally lost on them. It's obviously owned by an American, or it might be owned by an Irishman who's totally playing games.
Yeah, well, and it could. I would say it's not out of the character of the Irish.
Yeah. It's like, oh, these Americans don't know what this is. It's hilarious. They'll think it's funny. They'll think it's great. And I'm not even comfortable with telling the audience what spunk means. Just.
Oh, I'm comfortable with that as long as you phrase it the right way. It roughly it means the reproductive
aftermath
matter that a male excretes.
That. It's that.
That.
Yeah. So, yeah, but let's, go back, let's talk about the, biblical text for a minute. One of my favorite examples of this is depending on your Bible translation. The parts in Romans where Paul says, may it never be, or heaven forbid, or absolutely not. Right, like in Romans chapter 6 verse 1 but he does this a bunch. I think he does it like 7 times in the book of Romans, and every single English translation is different. Right, may it never be, heaven forbid, absolutely not. It depends, and the reason it's so different is because, prepare your ears, is because the Greek is more akin to saying something like hell no. And you could say, well, hell is not exactly a curse word, but it's still a spicy language, right? It's still like not something you expect a Christian to go around saying, like, should we continue living in sin so that grace may abound? Hell no. And so if you ever heard a Christian say that, it's usually like, whoa, hold on there, guy. Can you can you use the name of hell in vain? Like,
right. And I like that you described it as spicy, because that really is that's what these words really are at their core. In the modern age, it really is seasoning over speech.
Spicy.
Right? Because again, it's context dependent most of the time, right? So I've heard some fundamentalists try and argue about the negative impact of these words, right? That they're such negative words and everything, and I'm like, well, clearly you've never been around somebody who like uses profanity on a regular basis, or you've never been in a setting where most of the people are using profanity, because it's entirely context dependent. If my friend has achieved something great, or he got a new promotion at his job or something, or went out hunting the other day and got like a 12-point stag, like that's something where I could be like, that's awesome, and that's like as like white dad cheesy as you can get. Or I can use an expletive, and you're sprinkling on that seasoning that amplifies the mood of the speech that's being conveyed. And that is something that, and people can argue with me about the subjectiveness of that. But I think you'd have a hard time arguing it, because pretty much anybody else only people who abstain from profanity out of self-righteousness are the people who would say, well, that doesn't actually amplify the language. Anybody else, especially people who do use profanity, will say, no, absolutely, it amplifies it.
Yeah, it might capture the emotional. And that's why Paul used spicy words in his language, was to capture either the seriousness or the emotive like response. He was looking to shock and awe people, and sometimes that's necessary. Even in there's a sermon out there where a guy, I think he drops the F-bomb in the sermon. And basically the rest of the sermon, he's like, many of you are more concerned that I had said the F-bomb rather than being concerned with the truth that I have dropped. Like you are so caught up in this superficial standard that you've set for yourself that you've completely ignored the message.
Yep.
So, that's just him expressing like there's a cultural disconnect that's happening where otherwise spicy language would help to drive a point home. And fundamentalists have turned it into a thing where like that's the concentration, like spicy language is a no-go. And just from a historian's perspective, the reason why we have spicy language in the English language is, in the early days of English, when it was still a young wee baby in its first state, Old English, it was primarily French spoken, actually. And all the aristocrats spoke a very, very French version of Anglo-Saxon English. And only the poor people spoke the Germanic version. And so if you were an aristocrat and you want to be very aristocratic, you basically say, that language is beneath us. And so any of the Germanic style words, if they were spoken, they were considered taboo amongst the aristocrats. It was a class division thing. And that's why all the so-called curse words that we have today are all Germanic in nature. Freaking, or Scheisse. You know the ones, but they're all Germanic, and that's because the French were like, well, they speak the lower class, and so that's a swear word. That's a forbidden, no spicy word that we don't say because we're better than that. We're above them, and that's where they kind of come
That's
from.
poor people speak.
Yeah, and so getting now we're in America. We don't do the class system like that. We don't have nobles. We don't recognize nobility per the Constitution in this beautiful country of ours. And so
America was uniquely that way.
Yeah.
Alexis de Tocqueville was one of the first people to note, as a historian, to note that America was the first country he'd ever heard of where the man dining at a restaurant would call his waiter sir, and the waiter would also call him sir, because everybody was a sir here. Everybody is a noble here. It's not that we don't recognize nobility. It's that everybody is a human being, a man.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now this is the Jewish concept, as I understand it. There are inappropriate words, sure, but there are no forbidden words. There's no Torah command that says you can't say this word. It's not there. The only thing you can't say is pronounce a curse or try to invoke divine intervention. But there's no words that are listed that you cannot say. That's entirely cultural.
I'm going to say.
But there are inappropriate
in Judaism,
words, right? The things that you should avoid saying for professional reasons.
Well, and in Judaism, and this will be a lot of people may be thinking right now, well, what about that verse that talks about corrupt communication?
Gossip.
Lashon hara.
Gossip.
Right? The evil tongue. Yes, that is gossip. That is slander. That is not referring to profanity. That's actually referring to something that is all too common in Christian churches.
Spreading false information or spreading embarrassing information that might be true. Still slander.
Right, even if it's true. Yeah, if it brings shame upon the person for you to be spreading it publicly, that is Lashon hara.
The Shulchan will even go so far as to say that if you say something about yourself that brings honor to yourself and by implication brings dishonor or lessens another person, like comparison, that's considered gossip because you have compared yourself and made yourself above him, even if it's indirectly. But you've still done it, and that's still a prohibition. You still can't do that. And so the Jewish people are very careful as to not belittle somebody or try to appear as better than somebody else. Spicy language doesn't matter, especially amongst, and we kind of opened with this, depending on our company. Obviously you and I understand that these spicy words are just that. They're just spicy words. And if I'm just having a conversation with just you in private, it's just me and you, that's not going to be a stumbling block for outsiders. And so we say whatever we want. I'm a Marine. I've got a mouth on me when I need one. But in the company of others, especially when I'm acting as a representative to somebody else, you and I both, we maintain a very professional appearance, and we shift things for that reason. Because it might not be appropriate. Like in a professional setting, certain things are not appropriate to talk about, even if you're talking about them professionally. You can't talk about sexually explicit material, even professionally, in a work environment. You can't. And so the environment determines the appropriateness. A propriety? I don't know. The appropriateness.
The propriety,
I went to college, I swear. Of a particular word or phrase or even topic. And that's our main point here.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is something that actually can either help or hurt your witness.
Yeah.
So, because again, this is another one of those things that I feel like a lot of Christians just have no concept of how non-Christians view them. And I feel like that's part of the indoctrination process, because they think, well, people will notice that I don't drink and I don't smoke and I don't curse, and that'll be admirable. It's like, no, Usually people are put off by it. They're annoyed by it. They because they don't look at you as a mirror by which to judge themselves and think, "Man, I'm really not a good person." No, they look at you as a person who thinks very loftily of
Yeah.
themselves and that you're better than them, and so that's why you're above using that kind of language, and so you're better than
It's
them,
aristocratic.
and that's why they're right, exactly. They still view it as
Exactly how
aristocratic.
it is.
And so it's very off-putting, which is why a lot of times if you are just a normal person and you go to hang out at the bar, you have your beer and you talk like a normal person to the person who's sitting next to you, right? You don't go out of your way to use substitutes, which has become very, very popular in Christian culture. Is the substitutes? It's like, look, guy, we know what
Yeah,
word you're
we know
trying
what
to
you're
dance
getting at.
around. Like,
Just say it.
yeah, just go ahead and
Yeah.
say it. Um, and yeah, so if you're not using substitutes, you're not trying to dance around using profanity. You just say what you mean, right? Like be honest with them.
Yeah.
People open up to that because now to them you're a real person, and they feel more like you will probably treat them like they're a real person,
Cursing
and that you
usually,
don't think that you're better than them.
yeah, swear words are usually, what was it? They're usually associated with honesty in people. And so it's seen as a more
Yeah,
honest
it's
thing. And you got to remember another thing about this, right? If you're gonna use this kind of language in an environment, when you do that, most people in the world do not see language as being a moral issue, and so and it really is not a moral issue. The only moral issue is to pronounce a curse on someone and to invoke divine intervention for justice or vengeance. But saying spicy words is not a moral problem. And so if you are more willing to use more free language, right, to use spicy words, um, the other person you may be speaking with will not see you as somebody who's above them, right? Like, oh, I'm more moral than you are because I don't use the F bomb. They don't see it that way. They think, okay, yeah, you're just pretentious and shallow and pedantic, and it sucks, and I don't want to talk with you anymore because you can't be honest with me. You'd rather circumlocute with everything, and you're probably going to preach at me later. But again, back to your bar scenario, just having a drink, using regular spicy, not cursing your fellow man, using some spicy words. If you're that kind of person, I know when I'm with other Marines, I'm a little bit more spicy with my language, and they're more comfortable around me, and it's a lot more open to a discussion. And sometimes I bring that up. Now, hey, I thought Christians can't curse. Oh, well, funny you should ask about that, because it turns out you don't have to change that much about you to be a Christian, and let me tell you why. And that's an amazing starting position for a testimony or a witness.
It really is. It even in a workplace scenario, starting a new job, almost the way that I gauge exactly how rigid I have to be at this job, like in my day-to-day practice, is whether or not my boss feels comfortable using profanity. Because again, that's just like you said, it's something associated with honesty. I remember when me and my wife were first talking, and she comes out of a pretty fundamentalist background also. Um, and I straight up told her, I was like, look, I don't trust people who don't use profanity. Like I just laid it out. I was like, yeah, I mean, it seems dishonest to me. It really does. Um, and but yeah, no, like if I'm in a new job or something like that, and I hear the boss, speaking to another employee, and not at them, but in casual conversation like normal people do, I hear him drop a few spicy words. I'll be like, oh, okay, he's cool.
He'll probably not beat
It's
around
like,
the bush
okay,
with me. Yeah.
he's a chill guy. I can let my hair down, like, and be me, and not be this like rigid cookie cutter person that is not me.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, we not like condoning going out and having a meeting in a business setting and just dropping whatever you want. There's an appropriate time and a place for everything, right? There's a time and a season for everything. And again, we here at Ultimate Media are trying to maintain a much more professional outlook. because it is incredibly off-putting to other people. So there are some people who will not engage with you if cursing is involved. And okay, we'll meet them where they are, and it's just seen as unprofessional sometimes. Okay, cool. So we there is a certain adherence, because it is a cultural thing, and we're sensitive to that. But we are saying that in the right company, especially in like private company with people that you know very well, that you're close with, and it's not going to be a stumbling issue for them or cause them to like question everything about their faith because you brought it up. We're saying that you should not feel guilty for dropping a spicy word every so often. There's a funny study done during the Civil War about the use of profanity during wartime. Funny enough, so cultural, right? Veterans at the time and to this day used spicy language so often that it was part of their normal everyday speak. And so if an NCO, a non-commissioned officer, would come in and try to alert everybody about the gravity of the situation, like they're under attack, it was shown that if he used profanity, it usually they would think he was joking. And so it was like kind of received like, oh, whatever. And like the rush really wasn't all there. And when he didn't use profanity, then everyone was like, oh, it's real. Oh, okay. And then they would get up and the alert was much more heightened and the response was much faster. And that's a cultural thing, right? Where in just like this bubble of the culture that is veterans, where not cursing is a bad indicator versus using swear words is just normal everyday speak, and that's an indication that everything's good to go, right? And if you avoid using that kind of speech, well, then that indicates that there might be a serious issue. And so that's a cultural aspect that's even within the subculture of American veterans.
It's funny actually. I'm just sitting here thinking, because it's still on my mind what you said about it being a sign of honesty. And that even extends to persons who actually don't in their day-to-day life use profanity, really as a regular practice, but like around in their inner circle, like that tight-knit group of people that they know they can depend on. Feel free still to use it, and so you and I have a mentor in common, that around his wife and around women in general, absolutely not, and generally around just anybody won't, but certainly not around women, but particularly with you and I, and maybe just a select few other people, is totally fine using profanity.
Yeah.
And that's because we're the trusted. Right. It's the not saying it around women. That's just because he's very old fashioned that way, extremely old fashioned that way. You just don't
curse in front of
don't
women.
use that language around women. Yes. But yeah, it's you know that he trusts you when he feels comfortable using profanity around you.
Yeah. And that is, for us anyway, when it first happened, it was like, we've been accepted. Wow. Like it was a huge honor. Like, oh my gosh, is this happening? Is this happening right now? Like,
Yep.
We're like listening for the show.
We've been initiated.
Yeah. Context is everything. And I think, again, addictive behavior, there's definitely a such a thing as overdoing it. And, it's very contextually, and just remember, it is not explicitly prohibited or forbidden, and so you don't feel this sense of guilt like I've just committed a sin, right? And I deserve to die. Like the wages of sin is death, right? So if I drop the F-bomb, I deserve death and need to repent of that. That's not the case. You're just forming consonants together to make a word that culturally might be spicy or not received very well, but it's not explicitly forbidden. It's not, the definition of sin isn't there. It's not there for that. And so, we tell people all the time, you and I, because the Bible says, that there's freedom in the Torah. And we're like, dude, yeah, when you understand like the cultural, like the history, when you become Torah observant, you are so much more free from that fundamentalist stuff that most Christians are so used to. Where you can actually kind of let your hair down, have a cigar every once in a while, drink a beer on a night that you're just like, I'm kind of done for the day, and have a conversation with your best bud, and say how you really feel. Say a few of those words that really express the way you feel about a certain thing, and get it off your chest, and it's fine, man. Don't feel guilty for that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just be a real person to other people. I think for me that was definitely the biggest part of it, is coming out of a fundamentalist background and then into the life of Torah, and realizing how many things were taught to me that they were sins, are not sins. And then, a number of other things that I was taught are not sins that are. But there definitely was a sense of liberation. And what really, really hit me, though, is like, okay, I can be a real person now. Like, when you grow up in fundamentalism, there's already an understanding at a young age, and I feel like a lot of people just don't admit this to themselves. There's an understanding at a young age that you're being expected not to be a real person. It's not that you're being expected to be, above the world or outside of the world or separate from the world. You're just expected to be somebody who's genuinely not genuine. Like you're not real to the rest of the world. And the realization that I could just be a real person, and I could speak to other people like I was a real person, like they're real people, and that you could connect with other people that way much better. That was a big eye opener for me. And it's not that we're just like the world now, because we certainly aren't. Because if you're obeying the Torah, like, that really is the only true way to be in the world and not of it, is that there are certain parts of the world that you can share in. Absolutely. Yeah. But there are other parts that you can't, because the Torah says not to. And those are the parts that are noticeable. And those are the parts that are conversation starters. And those are the parts that, when you're being a real person to other real people in a setting where you can, you'll get a beautiful opportunity to expose other people to the Word of God.
It's the things that are not off-putting that you should be different about. And I think appearing holier than thou is one of those. Holidays, yes. Really, again, the kosher laws, be holy for I am holy. It says that explicitly. These are one of the ways that you can be different from the rest of the world. The world eats whatever they want to eat. You only eat what I tell you to eat. That's a notable difference. The rest of the world celebrates holidays on X, Y, and Z days. You celebrate these 7 holidays that I've made for you. Those are the way that God tells us to be different from the world. There are explicit instructions. And the drinking, smoking, and swear words, it's not. I mean, drinking is kind of in there to an extent. But the rest of that stuff, that is a Western invention that is only culturally relevant. That is not a biblical precept that didn't develop until much later in Western thought. So,
yep.
Yeah. And my biggest thing is don't feel guilty about it. I know when I was first becoming a Christian, it was a big guilt thing for me. And so learning, even knowing about it, and still like having the intellect to understand that I shouldn't feel guilty, but still feeling guilty anyway, it was kind of like, just weird. It took a minute to get used to it, I guess. But it's not to say like, well, if it feels like a sin, then it is a sin, so you shouldn't be callous to it. Again, the sin is defined in the Torah, and the Torah does not define this as a sin. And so any guilt that you feel is purely pressed upon you from the culture.
Yeah, that can be an issue of conditioning.
Yeah.
Because I mean that's like telling somebody with Stockholm syndrome that if they feel guilty for not being with the family that kidnapped them, then it's a sin. It's like, well, I mean, no, they've been conditioned to feel a certain way. That I would definitely say that, especially the more fundamentalist churches, they do in fact condition people to feel a certain way, particularly with smoking, drinking, language, and I would dare say add sexuality to that. That's That's another subject for another
Yeah,
episode.
yep.
We need to do an episode on sexuality.
I did a TikTok talking a little bit about this, and we definitely should hit it on an episode because people got all the wrong ideas about it.
Yes.
But for now, do you want to, I guess, do our outro, call it a night? We're hitting the 2-hour mark. We're way over what we normally do.
Yeah, which is funny because I really thought this would be a shorter episode because it's such a short topic. Like, there really just aren't that many biblical arguments
Yeah,
for the
I'm
opposite.
with you on that. I thought it was going to be so short. Like,
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, we can roll the outro and call it. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I do. Yep. I have something else entirely. L'chaim.